Welcome to a new podcast episode of Radiology AI. My name is Dania Daye, and I'm the Associate Editor for Social Media for Radiology AI. And today, my co-host Paul Yee and I are very excited to bring a new episode of Radiology AI podcast. In this episode, we will be interviewing Dr. Farouk Dako, Dr. Felipe Kitamura, and Dr. Vidur Mahajan on the role of AI in global radiology. Farouk, Felipe, and Vidur, thank you so much for joining us today. First, I'm going to start with a few introductions. So Dr. Dako, he is an assistant professor of radiology in the cardiothoracic imaging division at the University of Pennsylvania. His research currently focuses on population and global health, and specifically the role that radiology can play in advancing health equity, including the use of technologies like AI. He completed his diagnostic radiology residency at Temple, followed by fellowships in cardiothoracic radiology and imaging informatics at the University of Maryland. Dr. Dako has worked in global radiology for over 5 years, with focus in Nigeria, mainly through Rad 8 International. Dr. Felipe Kitamura, he is a neuroradiologist in the Department of Diagnostic Imaging at Universidade Federal de Sao Paulo. I hope I did not butcher that, where he completed residency, PhD, and fellowship. He is currently head of AI and innovation in diagnostic operations at DASA, the largest medical diagnostic company in Latin America. Dr. Kitamura is also a Kaggle competitions master, achieving top finishes in multiple competitions, including third place in the 2017 RSNA Bone Age Challenge and a gold medal in the RSNA 2018 Pneumonia Challenge. He's also a leader in multiple radiology societies, including co-chair of the SIM Machine Learning Education Subcommittee and training deputy editor for radiology, member of RSNA Radiology Informatics Committee and Machine Learning Challenge Task Force. Dr. Vidur Mahajan, he is a physician and MBA who completed medical school from LTM Medical College in Mumbai and MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He is currently head of CARING, the Center for Advanced Research in Imaging, Neuroscience and Genomics, as well as the Mahajan Imaging Research and Development Wing, which is building Carpal, the world's first end-to-end validation and deployment platform for medical imaging AI. He additionally runs Caring DX, the most advanced molecular diagnostics lab in North India, focused currently on genome sequencing and real-time PCR. As an expert in both medicine and business, he has the unique experience launching businesses to bring state-of-the-art technologies to underserved parts of the world. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Paul to start the discussion. Paul.
Thank you again, Dania, for the introduction, and thank you to our guests for joining us from all over the world. Each of you come from different backgrounds, both from your professional experiences as well as your countries of origin. Can you share with us how you got involved with AI and how your backgrounds have contributed to where you are today? Maybe we can start with Farouk.
Thanks a lot for having me today, Paul and Dania. Definitely a pleasure to be back in touch with you guys. So yes, as mentioned, I am from Nigeria. I was born and raised over there. I came over to the US when I was 15. And, I really started to get involved in informatics towards the end of my residency at Temple University. And then I did the informatics fellowship at University of Maryland, where I met and learned from people like you, Paul. And, really got to understand more about the role AI could play in global health. At the same time, I had been working in global radiology for over 5 years. So I was able to see some of the unmet needs on a global scale and to sort of see where AI could potentially help meet some of these needs. So that's really how I got involved in AI, really as an extension of my involvement in global radiology.
So Vidur here, my background, another aspect of my background is that my family runs a chain of medical imaging centers in North India. It's called Mahajan Imaging. And so I kind of consider myself to be born in DICOM because I spent most of my childhood in imaging centers playing with the computers there because we didn't have computers at home back in the day. The way I got involved in AI is an extension of running Mahajan Imaging, the company. So while I was at Penn, we had Zebra Medical, which is one of the oldest AI startups come to campus to recruit for product positions for for AI. And this was 2014, 2015, when AI in radiology was essentially just an acronym for CAD. So, I visited Zebra's office in Israel, met the team there, and that just blew my mind, right? That there is this movement in radiology that is coming, and we need to be a part of this because, at Mahajan Imaging, we pride ourselves in being the most innovative and forward-thinking group, in that this part of the world. But what started happening was when I came back to India from Wharton, we started partnering left, right, and center with any AI startup, any academic group that we could, and started to try to use AI in day-to-day practice. And again, I'm talking 2016, 2017, early 2018. And we really wanted to try it out. Paras Lakhani had come up with that tuberculosis paper in early 2017. So there was a lot of excitement around this, and we wanted to be a part of it. But unfortunately, no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't find, a useful way of using AI, which is when we started caring to formalize a lot of this work into a unit. We found Vasant, who's like my partner in crime at Caring. He leads imaging research. Radiologist, tagged him to a bunch of developers and neuroscientists, molecular biologists, and started trying to use AI very desperately. And that's when we built a lot of internal tools to run really, really fast validation studies, deploy AI in clinical settings. And that led to then what is Carpal, which is our platform today. So essentially, it stemmed from wanting to be part of this, incoming AI revolution, and then, trying very, very hard to use AI in day-to-day practice, and then building a bunch of tools around that, which has brought us to where we are today in the scheme of things. So a lot of serendipity combined with, meeting cool people around.
All right, thanks, Vidur. How about next we'll have Felipe?
You know what? It's interesting too. I didn't know a lot of stuff about Farouk and Vidur. So this is Felipe Kitamura. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today with my distinguished colleagues. I've always been keen on programming. I started learning a programming language called Clipper when I was 13 years old. Then I went to BASIC, then embedded C, assembly, MATLAB, and finally Python. My first contact with AI was in med school during the neurophysiology course in 2004 when I coded a simple neural network as a final project. I didn't know about the existence of backpropagation at that time, so it didn't work as I expected. But 12 years later, after finishing radiology residency, I saw the potential of AI in radiology, and I was scared I could lose my job. So I started studying it. I bought a PC with a GPU to try myself and see if there was real news in the hype that everyone was talking about. So I downloaded some images from CT scans from Google Images, both normal and bleeds in head CTs, and started to train neural networks. It didn't work at first, but eventually I got good results, which motivated me to continue in this path. Although I have no formal background in engineering or computer sciences, I have been studying these fields as a hobby. I've participated in the development of medical devices during med school. No AI in those, but still an interdisciplinary work. After residency, I took some online courses on digital signal processing calculus, linear algebra, as well as some machine learning and deep learning courses by Professor Andrew Ng. And I think that gave me a little background to train neural networks myself and compete in Kaggle competitions. And winning some of those RSNA challenges gave me the visibility in Brazil that led me to be hired as the head of AI at DASA, which is the fourth largest diagnostic company in the world today.
Thanks everyone for sharing your experiences. We're really fortunate to have such a wide array of different perspectives and experiences from different areas of the country and different perspectives in radiology. So we all know that there are tremendous opportunities for AI to improve human health, from triaging studies with potentially emergent findings to bringing expert level care to places where there are few radiologists. I'm curious, Vidur, having been working in this space, partnering with academic centers, with startups all over the world, what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities that are specific to global health for AI?
So I like to think of it in terms of the simple framework that we use when we're thinking about applications of AI. And from a pure radiology perspective, we can break it into, let's say, pre-scanning, scanning, and post-scanning, right? So pre-scanning is all of the administrative components that one would think of. Patients actually showing up for a scan, all the subparts of that when you deal with appointment systems and queuing mechanisms and all of that. So we won't touch that because that doesn't fall under the realm of AI the way we think about it today. But there is tremendous scope there. So I always make it a point to mention that. On the scanning and post-scanning side of things, I think some of the greatest opportunities from a global health perspective lie in the scanning, right? Where you can literally use older generation equipment to create images that are of similar or maybe sometimes even higher quality than current standard of care equipment, right? Case in point is, for example, Subtle Medical, what they're trying to do out of California, where they talk about this virtual upgrade, right, where you can take a 1.5T image from an MR and make it look like a 3D image. And also, we're seeing already companies like GE are implementing deep learning based iterative reconstruction into CT scanners, where you can take, produce further low dose imaging. And, all of this leads to cheaper machines, which can then or faster scans, or cheaper machines and faster scans, which can eventually lead to greater utilization of equipments in the developing world from a global health perspective. So I think one aspect is surely the scanning and maximizing utilization and maximizing machine lifetime using AI-based technologies. On the cognitive side of things, I think the best example is of tuberculosis screening using chest X-ray, right? And I don't think that applies only to the developing world. That would very much apply to anywhere on the planet where tuberculosis is endemic. Primarily, we've seen those top TB papers where they talk about potentially AI being able to see, within inverted quotes, see tuberculosis see gene expert positive tuberculosis in areas or in X-rays where humans may not be able to figure it out. So then it doesn't matter whether you're in a amazing radiology department like Penn, which has the most trained radiologists on the planet, or if you're in a underdeveloped country with no radiologists, because the value that AI brings in there is something that a human being, at least today, cannot provide. So certainly, screening for diseases, absolutely, and also on the scanning side. The one point I do want to make is the value of triaging in developing parts of the world is still being explored. Because many of the triaging algorithms that are out there today, especially as it pertains to head CT scans, replicate a process that in the developing world is performed by the technician, right? Which is essentially looking at the images as they come off the scanner and calling up a radiologist and saying that, hey, can you look at these? Can you look at Vidur's scan first? I think there's something there. So, which is something that, may not be possible in, say, a country like the US, where, there are legal safeguards that avoid, such direct calling and, informal reporting of cases. But broadly, tremendous scope on the increasing equipment utilization space and, of course, the automated diagnostics side of things.
No, thanks for sharing, Vidur. I think that's really interesting because what I'll say is maybe in an informal way, as a resident on call, we do sometimes get tips from our tech saying, hey, I think there's something on the scan. So definitely still happens in the US. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for AI to maybe bring that type of collaboration and that type of value to places that don't have that. I'm curious, Felipe, is that the case in Brazil as well? How do the workflows work there?
Hi, Felipe here. So I agree with Vidur, and this is mostly what we see in Brazil as well. The techs usually take a look at the images and try to warn radiologists to read some studies first. Most of the times, I think they're correct. Sometimes they don't know what they're seeing and they are just a little worried about something that is not urgent. But I think in many cases, they do help triage real urgent cases.
No, thanks for sharing, Felipe and Vidur. I think that's really interesting to think about how the workflows in other countries might mirror or be similar to that in the US. I've often wondered how radiology is practiced from a practical standpoint. So it's really eye-opening. Amidst the opportunity for AI, we know that in any clinical deployment of a tool or intervention, there's always some potential unforeseen challenge or hangup. One example that comes to mind is a recent paper that was published by Google's AI healthcare team, where they deployed a diabetic retinopathy screening tool in a clinic in Thailand, ostensibly with the idea of bringing expert level ophthalmology care to places that don't have these highly trained specialists. But what they found was that although this algorithm worked really well in the lab, deployment in the real world was another story. So although the algorithm did give highly accurate predictions when it accepted an image, it often rejected images that were of low quality due to factors like low lighting. So Farouk, I'm wondering, based on your experience deploying PACS and other types of radiology technologies in Nigeria, what are potential challenges that you foresee in developing and deploying AI for global health applications, and perhaps some that you might have experienced firsthand yourself?
A great question, Paul. Thanks for that. So yeah, I read that paper myself as well, and I found it really interesting. I think it definitely brings about the question of what some people call delivery science for AI. So how do you go from sort of from the bench to the clinical world? And one of the things we've realized is that in order for these algorithms to work, we need to basically have a plan to deliver it, which first starts by understanding what the current healthcare system looks like. And we need to design what it'll look like in a post-implementation world. So there's a need for a multidisciplinary team. There's a need for involvement of the local institution where it is being installed at every phase of planning. And it's also important to make sure the AI software, whatever is being installed, is answering a question that's important to all the stakeholders, right? So, are you installing an AI solution that actually results in more work for the techs, or requires more supervision in a place where there's a shortage of radiologists to supervise the outputs? Definitely, from like installing packs and other software, we've learned that things are not always as expected. And that's why Radiology as an organization takes an approach of performing a needs assessment prior to implementation and involving all the stakeholders at every step of the way. Yeah, so I remember when we installed a PACS system in a hospital in Nigeria, and we got there, and despite our best efforts, as we soon realized that we needed a lot more than what we came with, which included wires, as well as even access to some devices that we didn't have access to. So we definitely learned the need to be, to be hands-on, and the need to be able to adapt to the current situation, which is what we ended up doing to be successful in that particular installation.
Thanks for sharing that, Farouk. I think that's really interesting to hear about some of the practical things that you experienced in your work with RadAid. Shifting gears slightly, one topic that's come to the forefront in AI in general, and in healthcare specifically, is the potential for bias in AI algorithms that might reflect biases present in data sets and the society that the data sets come from. And although a lot of focus has been on racial or gender-based biases, I've wondered about the potential for bias against underrepresented countries, possibly on the basis of differences in disease presentation or prevalence or some other factors. Felipe, as head of DASA, you work with data sets from a large country that has many different people of different origins, as well as collaborations with countries whose populations are pretty different from Brazil. So I'm curious, in your role as a researcher, working with people from all over the world, working with heterogeneous data sets, do you have any thoughts about the potential for biases to limit the impact of AI in radiology and maybe some potential solutions to mitigate these biases?
So I think that's a very relevant question. So I agree with what you said, that racial and gender biases are real, as well as differences in disease presentation and prevalence. I also think there is difference in the scanners due to different manufacturers, different models, or even in the shift of texture that images may suffer within the same scanner as it gets older. So there may be many other sources of bias that we haven't even thought of. In my opinion, the only practical way I see to prevent these biases is to create local test sets that represent the local population. We can even think of creating multiple test sets that represent particular sources of bias. For example, we could create one test set for each race in that population, or one test set for children, another for adults, another for older people. One test set for each scanner model, and so on. Then we could apply the concept of unit testing, which I borrowed from software engineering, to test if the models will perform well in each of these conditions or not. And I think Radiology AI has also a blog post with great resources about bias in AI. I strongly recommend that.
Vidur, I'm curious too, for your work with caring, have you run into any of these issues or had any considerations when creating these test sets for these clinical validations that you've been running?
Absolutely, Paul. Like, this is kind of the bread and butter of what we do. And just to take the bias point further, going a little bit more specific, even while race and gender seem to be evident and easy to discern, like if you're training a chest X-ray model and if you're training it to find consolidation, and if one doesn't really know what they're doing, you will start picking up breast shadows in women as consolidation. And so that's the kind of insight that developers need to figure out. And that's an evident form of bias. But what Felipe was alluding to, our mind is occasionally blown because we've seen differences in convolution kernels that the CT scanners use to to go from sinogram to DICOM data. And on the same scanner, at two sites configured by two different service engineers, and the images look exactly the same, but somehow the models screw up. And then we've also seen examples of chest X-ray models picking up sub-centimetric nodules effectively, but disregarding 5-centimeter masses, simply because it thinks the 5-centimeter mass is a pacemaker, right? So of course, while building test sets, one best practice that we tell all of our collaborators is to not go by population prevalence, and instead over factor for less represented populations. So for example, if I'm in New Delhi, and while most of my populations are going to be most of my patients are going to be North Indian, I cannot afford for the AI to fail on a patient from South India or from from outside of India. So that means that while I'm testing AI, naturally the number of North Indian patients in my test set is going to be higher, but I need to make sure that I have a greater than population representation of other populations in my test set, so that I know that it works on those, because I can't disregard those cases by saying that, hey, I only see 10 patients from Afghanistan every year, so it's okay for me to remove that from my test set, unless I build a filtering mechanism into my model where I ask for the patient's race or ethnicity as an input to the model, and then I give like an I don't know kind of response to a patient that comes out of my routine training set, which is something that we are pushing for big time. Like, if your model doesn't work on obese people, ask for a BMI value, and then just say I don't know for a BMI greater than 30 or 35 or something like that. So those are ways of mitigating these biases where, pre-inferencing or before the model actually runs, you figure out that my model is not going to be good on this particular patient. So, Mr. Model, please don't run. So those are the very practical approaches that we're trying to build out programmatically.
Oh, thanks for sharing those ideas. I think that it's really a point well taken that we have to make sure that the data sets that we're using are representing some of these underrepresented populations. But one thing that I'm at a loss for is practically how do we do this? Farouk, you and I have had conversations before about racial disparities in lung cancer screening, for instance. If we're not able to even capture some of these patients in the first place, how can we even begin to create these data sets that might represent these other populations? So I'm wondering, for any of our guests tonight, do you have any ideas of how can we actually achieve these goals of, one, building these test sets that will represent the necessary populations, and two, what are ways that we can maybe do this not just in places like the US where there might be a lot of research infrastructure, but in other places where they might not have that kind of infrastructure or resources?
So yeah, Paul, yeah, we've definitely had a lot of conversations about racial disparities and things of that nature. And I think the whole idea of race and racial disparity is interesting, especially when you look at it on a global scale. There's a concept of, so race is not a biologic market in itself, right? So there's nothing intrinsic about a particular race that makes a disease present in one way versus the other. But there's an association between race, place, and space, as people like to say. So, folks from a particular race might be overly represented in a particular place, and a disease might also be overly represented in that place. So the best thing to do is to include folks from all around the world. And I think that's the situation that we're in right now, where AI is sort of making us focus on these things and making us realize that we need to be more inclusive in our data sets. We made these mistakes already in the past in medicine when it came to like clinical trials, right? By not being more inclusive, and we've seen the results of that. So I think the great thing about the current situation right now with AI is that it's forcing us to sort of go back and try to correct some of the mistakes that we have made, because there's really no other way to, for example, how you fix the fact that tuberculosis, as was mentioned early on, in certain populations presents as like primary tuberculosis, right? Where it's not necessarily upper lung predominant. It's usually more lower lung predominant. How do you fix that if your algorithm was built in, let's say, the US, where most of the tuberculosis is as a result of reactivation, where most of the nodules are in the upper lungs, right? So it's not going to work in Nigeria. And it's not specific to race, but it's due to the fact that, yes, even though there's more Black people in Nigeria, those folks are typically younger because it's a lower middle income country, and typically have more primary tuberculosis. So, I really think the only way to go around it is really be more inclusive in conversations and the creation of data set, and ultimately in the adoption of AI products.
So I totally agree with what Farouk said. And to your point, Paul, I think there's this difficulty in creating this very specific data sets with any kind of minority. And maybe that's the $1 million question, which is how can we create those data sets to validate or even train our models for these specific populations or minorities?
Just chiming in, Paul, Vidur here. You know, the analogy we try to use, you know, when we're trying to convince, you know, a non-academic hospital that doesn't have the research resources to actually put together high-quality test sets, is that it's similar to when you get a new MR scanner, right? You literally spend the first 2 weeks tweaking it and, you know, playing with the knobs and, you know, no matter if it's your, you know, first scanner or if it's your 50th, right? There is that 1 to 2 week to 3 week period where you're optimizing protocols, you're sitting with the service engineer, and you're essentially investing time in order to derive the benefits of that scanner. And the same logic would need to be applied to AI. Like, you can't expect to, you know, hey, you know, from tomorrow onwards, all of my normal x-rays are going to be read by AI, and, you know, I'll save like $1,000 a day, and, you know, everything's going to be amazing. You don't get that for free, right? You'll have to spend a few days, a few nights testing it out, making sure that, you know, it works, and only then would you be able to derive the benefit of those AI systems. So and you know, people can understand it fairly well.
No, thank you, Vidur. I think that all of these perspectives are super interesting. I think they're super well taken. And I think it's interesting to think about AI as something that has a lot of promise, but there's a lot of practical things that we're going to need to figure out over the next probably, you know, I would guess 20 plus, 30 plus years before this can really transform radiology the way that some of us might hope. As we wind down in our last minutes of our conversation, I want to pose a question to all of you. Just looking forward, what are you most excited about for the next decade in radiology AI or informatics in general? Maybe we can start with Felipe.
Sure. Yeah, that's another interesting question. Thanks, Paul. So I think AI in radiology is in its infancy. Most of the work we've seen so far are proof of concept. I'm excited to think that what we see today is just a glimpse of what is yet to come. There are countless use cases of AI that can improve patient care. And I think it's our job to prove they are worth it from both clinical and financial standpoint. Only then we will see a massive rise of AI. And I'd like to quote Dr. Charles Ken. And that, I think, will allow us to extend our human abilities to provide medical care and to improve the lives of those we are privileged to serve.
And Farouk?
So I'm definitely most excited about the potential for AI to bring folks together from different time zones, as is in this podcast right now, to solve problems that are unique to our various areas that we live in, and to create a more inclusive and a better medical society.
And last but not least, Vidur.
So you know, so let me paint a picture for you guys, at least you know, what I believe could be the future. So you know, if you ever go to Sao Paulo, and if you ever go to Dasa, you know, they have this huge facility called the Factory, and it's essentially the world's largest deployment of automated lab testing. And you know, they probably do like 100,000 tests a day, and they're all signed out by a limited number of pathologists or lab medicine experts, right? And we see this the world over, right? You'll have a biochemist or a pathologist or a hematologist sign off on 1,000 reports a day, 1,500 reports a day, 2,500 reports a day, because essentially what happens is you take blood, you put it into a so-called black box, and out pops a number on the other side, right? And the person who's signing off on that report knows that the number is correct because there are a bunch of security features or quality check features that are implemented in that entire journey through that black box. I think the same thing is going to happen in radiology. You know, radiologists are going to be signing off 10x, 20x, 30x the number of reports that they are signing off today. And whether it'll be AI assistance on every report, or whether 90% of them would be blind signatures, only time will tell. But I think if you think about it, if our MR machines or CT scanners, I think in MRI, sorry, but if our MR scanners become like 10x more productive, you would need a radiologist who's reporting those MRs to also be 10x more productive, and hence you would need the quality mechanisms in place. So I think 10 years from today, you guys would be doing a lot more work than what you're doing today, and with a lot less effort. But we need to figure out the quality checks, and then we should be home free.
Right. Thanks for sharing, Vidur. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited for the years to come. So with that, I want to say thank you again to our three guests, Farouk, Vidur, and Felipe, for joining us from all parts of the world, from different time zones, some of us late at night, some of us early in the morning. It's been a pleasure, and just thank you again. I'll give it back to Dania.
And again, I want to echo that. Thank you, Farouk, Felipe, and Vidur, for such a great discussion. And thank you for sharing with us your experience on implementing AI in global radiology and your vision for the future. I mean, I think you made all of us excited about what the future will hold for AI. I'm sure many of our listeners will benefit from your experience as more AI algorithms are implemented for global health applications. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to our February podcast episode. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our Radiology AI podcast series on any of iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Please stay tuned for our next episode.